I'm Darren Morton.
I'm Simon Matthews. This is Lift,
The lifestyle medicine podcast where we dive into the science of health and well-being. Well, hello there, my good friend Simon. How are you doing?
I'm very well, boss. How are you?
Boss now. Wow. Haven't been called that before.
You know, in Spanish, the word for boss is jefe, spelled Jefe. And in fact, it's used colloquially as well. So it kind of is a term of endearment. So, for example, when I went to pay for my coffee yesterday, the person whose bar I go to for coffee said, dos y cincuenta, jefe, which is €2.50. So basically in Australian, he would be saying $2.50, boss.
Well, actually, we still get that a little bit. I've heard people say use boss.
Yeah, we say that as well. Yeah, there you go.
Well, there you go. Hey, so I've got I wanted to quiz you a little bit on your cosmology and your understanding.
Cosmology.
So a little bit left of centre to start.
Can I just say something here? But by agreement, this is for the benefit of the listener. By agreement, we decided to record this podcast with me knowing absolutely nothing about the content. So that's Darren said, "Okay, we're going to explore a topic today, but I'm not going to tell you anything about it at all." Yes. So this is the first time I'm hearing the word cosmology.
Might be a little bit unfair, really, eh? But anyway.
No, I think it'll be fun.
Well, let's start easy. We'll start with an easy one. Okay, so what cosmological movement is it that determines our year?
What cosmological movement determines our year? Well, that would be the passage of the Earth around the sun.
Correct. You're 1 for 1. Well done. Okay.
But can I say, if I lived 700 or 800 years ago, I might say that it was the passage of the sun around the Earth.
Ah, that's true. And there's still some that might say that today.
Indeed, there are. But I'm 100% confident that it's the passage of the Earth around the sun.
Okay, here's the next one. How many high tides do we have a day?
Oh, so this is a little more nuanced because tidal movement occurs, I believe, very roughly every 6 hours, but it's less than 6 hours, which means most days you would expect to have 2 high tides and 2 low tides.
Low tides.
But I think perhaps there may be some days where like assuming a day starts at right on the stroke of midnight, there may be some days where you actually get 3 of one and 2 of the other.
Right.
Maybe.
Okay. Well,
I'm not so sure about that part, but.
Okay. What is it that determines what cosmological phenomenon is it that determines the tides?
Well, that's that's to do with the gravitational influence of the Earth's moon, which we just call the moon.
We do.
Moon is a generic word, by the way.
Yep.
Moon just means one of those things that spins around another object. But our moon, the one that the Artemis astronauts have just sort of spun around and come back from, exerts a small gravitational influence on our planet, and so that's what causes the rising and the lowering of the tides, the ocean tides.
That is correct. Pretty much. I'm going to give you 2 for 2 here. All right.
Can I just say at this point, I'm wasted as a psychologist. I should have been a cosmologist.
You should have been. Although that being the case,
what a missed opportunity.
I'll make a few little corrections there. It's actually a little bit longer than every 6 hours. So, and this
a little bit longer. So I had that the wrong. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so it looks like I need to stay being a psychologist because I've just failed cosmology school.
As
Okay.
a surfer, I'm always watching the tides, and I know that you pretty much an hour later every day. So you think, what happened to yesterday?
Oh, of
Okay, it's going to be an
course,
hour later.
yeah.
Last day.
Now that you say
Right.
that, I actually know that. So you would, so for that reason, you would never get more than 2 and 2 each day.
That's correct. You wouldn't.
Yeah.
And what's so fascinating about it is because obviously the moon only goes around once a day, pretty much. And why do you get 2 high tides then? Because the gravitational pull of the moon is obviously ballooning the water out on the side that the moon is, but you actually get a high tide on the opposite side of the Earth as well, because that is less affected than the actual planet. So it's this really interesting. So you get this double bulge, one on the side that the moon is, and then one on the other side that isn't. So you get actually two high tides each day. So anyway, interesting.
So
here's the next one.
Okay, because I've got a question too, but you ask me your next question.
All right, third question. What's the cosmological? So we've got about the sun going around the moon. Sorry, the Earth going around the sun, the moon going around the Earth. What's the cosmological rationale for a 7-day week?
I believe that this is a trick question.
You're about to get 3 for 3 here. Yeah, what's the trick?
I don't think there is a cosmological rationale. I think it's just a social and cultural rationale. And historically, days of the week derived their names largely from the gods of Roman mythology.
Yes.
And for that reason, we could. I mean, if we, we don't really even need weeks. I mean, we don't need weeks. We don't particularly need months. Actually, no. Sorry, I'm going to correct myself there. The names of the months, I think, derive from the gods of Roman mythology. The days of the week are a little more prosaic. So, for example, what we call Wednesday, the French called mercredi, and in Spanish it's miércoles. And so that those two languages are Romance languages, of course, Latin-based languages, and that really the etymology of those words is that they both relate to the word for market. So Wednesday was historically the market day.
Market day. Huh.
Yeah, market day. Yeah. Well, so I think the days of the week have a more prosaic origin, or the names of the days of the week have a more prosaic origin. Names of the months have a link to mythology, but in essence, days of the week and a 7-day week and 12-month year are really just conveniences.
They are, yeah. And this is a really interesting thing. So this is intriguing. This is what I'd love to talk about. There is actually some of the days of the week, for example, Sunday, obviously, the first day of the week, that got its name from the sun. And there are some others, I think. I probably should have researched a little bit more of that. But anyway, here's this really interesting thing. So, we, by convention, most of the world sort of follows this 7-day type of convention, this weekly convention. And they have experimented with other sort of patterns in the past. Like, what would make more sense, particularly in a decimal currency, and they tried this in during the French Revolution, and there's been some other times as well. A 10-day week. So instead of, let's make it a nice round 10. Let's go 9 days on, 1 day off. And it didn't seem to work that well. In fact, what they tended to observe was quite high levels of burnout, interestingly enough. And so it seems that there seems to be this convention that keeps coming back to this whole idea of 7-day cycle, or 7-day weekly cycle, where there's like this 6-day on, sort of 1 day off type of pattern. Now, and maybe we might talk about this, but I'm very interested in sort of the wisdom literature and some of the bringing in aspects of faith as well, and you see that pattern emerging lots. But what's been so fascinating is, and you can understand from a social construct, if most of us are sort of following that, like in my part of the world, it's even more probably like a 5-day on, 2-day off kind of thing, to the weekend. But nonetheless, there's still this 7-day cycle that seems to be emerging as a weekly convention. And what's interesting, you actually see, and there's been a lot of research done on this, looking at, for example, mood states and how they fluctuate over the course of a given week. And we know that, for example, with health outcomes, we know that heart attacks, for example, they're most prevalent on Monday morning, which is somewhat unremarkable because that's everyone's going back to work and they're probably stressed about that. But what we also see is that even amongst other species, and there's been more recent research done on this, but we actually see these what's referred to as circumseptan cycles, like 7 circumseptans, so 7-day cycles, in a whole range of really fascinating things. One of the first sort of pioneer researchers of this was a Danish endocrinologist by the name of Christian Hamburger. And he actually conducted it. He conducted this.
Not a plant-based lifestyle medicine endocrinologist. Then.
And he got around with his red nose, and he wore this yellow suit and these massive shoes, looked like the Hamburglar. And anyway, he did a self-experiment for about 15 years, and I think it would be conservative to say that this guy wasn't a tad eccentric, because for 15 years. He collected his own urine and measured the volume of it, as well as a whole lot of other body, biometrics and behavioural aspects. And what he noticed over this 15-year period, he actually noticed, hey, I've got these 7-day cycles in a whole range of these sort of behavioural and physiological metrics. But once again, you go, oh, well, it's probably the fact that you had, the weekend and they went to work.
Exactly right. This is an association, surely, rather than a causation. That's correct. Because he's living a life that culturally fits within that 7-day cycle.
Yes, that's correct. However, they're actually observing amongst the animal kingdom these interesting circumseptan cycles as well. And I find this quite intriguing. Like even algae, they've found its ability to process and photosynthesize fluctuates over a 7-day cycle. One of the most fascinating for me, and I also go, I'm thinking to myself, who thinks of this stuff? But they've actually found in Brazilian stallions, their semen volume and sperm motility actually follows a circumseptan cycle. Right, so there's once again, I don't know how they come up with that. Maybe it's just a random observation, but nonetheless, there's been this sort of observation that, and they're eclectic and quite interesting, but they seem to be gathering that there seems to be this circumseptan rhythm that aligns quite nicely with a lot of the sort of the faith traditions too. There seems to be this thing that happens that we fall nicely into and seem to observe this 7-day cycle. What do you think about that?
There's a couple of things coming to mind. The first is that we just talked about how there's no real cosmological explanation for this, as far as we understand. It's a social and cultural one, and if we accept the observations of the circumseptan cycle, then perhaps that does contribute to an argument for adopting a 7-day time frame in our minds, but there's still little to justify the idea of months. Months seem to serve no particular purpose to me. Why? I'm born on the 7th of February, but why can't I just be born on the 38th day of the year?
That's right.
I mean, it really makes no difference. So months themselves, for me, seem to be a bit of an anomaly, and maybe they're just a convenient way of chopping up a long period of time, so that we at least cultivate for ourselves a sense that we have a little more kind of control and manageability. But the circumseptan stuff is intriguing, and as I'm hearing you say this, my mind straight away goes to, but what's the role of human beings here? So, for example, even in your comment about algae, maybe I don't know, and you know, I might be a cosmologist, but I'm no marine biologist. Maybe on Sundays, more people get in the water, and that does something to the process of photosynthesis. So when they take samples, you know, something happens there. That's my first instinct is to try and understand what the association might be, rather than to kind of say, oh wow, it looks like everything does work to this kind of perfect 7-day cycle. I don't know. Can I say, I don't know how you just randomly uncover that information about horses, but whatever.
Yeah, well, that's right. And I agree with you. You know, you don't know to what extent is human intervention in some way influencing these other things we're observing. But nonetheless, to me, you know, I'm quite open-minded about these kind of things. And you know, I suppose full disclosure, I actually came from a faith tradition which actually has this sort of built into what they do. And I've actually come to sort of, I suppose, step back and go, what's the purpose of this? What's this all about? And I do, you know, not in a proselytizing way or anything, but I do have a great interest in the wisdom literatures and the stories and the potential benefits that they can share with us. And I'm thinking from a lifestyle medicine perspective. You know, we talk, one of the pillars of lifestyle medicine is stress management. And what I realised for me, and to this day, like as I said, I grew up in that, you know, faith tradition that sort of practiced this idea of what they call Sabbath, right? And a sabbatical was, you know, by its you know, actual standards, was Sabbath, this idea of 6 days on, 1 day off. And you know, if you even look back to, you know, like a creation story, you know, basically God doing stuff for 6 days and then taking a rest day, like he needed it for some particular reason. But what and sort of saying, hey, do this, follow this, I'm modeling this to you. And then you see, you know, even this whole idea of this Sabbath idea, this 1 day off in every 7, you know, even gets introduced in, you know, these 10 commandments. And what I'm finding, so I'm writing another book at the moment, and it's all about the tentative title of the book's going to be called Enough, and exploring, hey, you know, what's enough? You know, how much do we need, and what's the nice space? And what I've realised is, and this is sort of the window that I've been viewing it through, you have this whole idea, this biblical commandment which says, hey guys, 1 day a week, right? 1 day each week, time out, right? No working, right? So it's basically it's almost a retraction to consumerism. And what's really interesting, it says, you know, you're not going to do any work, right? So 6 days, knock yourself out, go for it, get busy, do all good stuff. But 1 day out, tap out, and don't make other people do it either, right? So if you've got your servants or your whatever, just give them some downtime as well. And I find this, for me personally, and so I still practice this day. For example, I don't check emails so I've Saturdays off, so I just don't check emails. I don't engage with a whole lot of this stuff. I don't generally go to shops and, you know, do whatever I need to do. I actually, really, what the heart of this whole idea of this Sabbath, if you like, is putting first things first, like prioritising, which is important. So, you know, your health and your relationships and all the rest of it. And I'm thinking, you know, it seems to be a real antidote to discovering enough, or a pathway to discovering enough, realizing that, you know what, I can do this stuff for 6 days, but let's just tap out for a day so that I don't get crazy with wanting more and more and more. But not only that, I find it an incredible stress release, to the point where I would say, I don't know how people go 24/7 and not burn out.
Well, I think we know the answer to that. They don't.
They don't. Yeah, well, maybe that's right. Maybe,
you know, that's what happens when we go, you know, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for a prolonged period of time. We get exhausted, and when we get exhausted, you know, other things happen. Exhaustion is a really useful word here.
Lift is supported by the Lift Project, an educational adventure where you learn science-based ways to lift your mood and your life. The Lift Project is lifting lives around the globe, in healthcare settings, workplaces, schools, universities and communities. To find out more, visit theliftproject.global.
We talk about, for example, supplies or resources being exhausted. I've exhausted my supply of fuel or food or water or whatever it might be. And, in that state of exhaustion, our pool of resources has dwindled down to nothing. And therefore, when we try and do something that's needs to be done or is significant to us, we simply don't have the resources to do it. And that cuts across all areas of life. So if you're working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and either 28, 29, 30 or 31 days a month, see how useless months are. If you're working all month without a break, then almost any situation that is a challenge for you, it's going to be very difficult. Your car's got a flat tire, one of your kids is sick, your partner's upset about something, you've run out of oregano for cooking the evening meal, you didn't bring in firewood, at the beginning of the day, whatever it might be. All those things just feel and seem like they're overwhelming because we've exhausted our resources. So for me, one of the really interesting things about all of this is if we kind of zoom into the micro level, there's two things that I would say. The first is that we know, so we talked about circaseptan rhythm, but we also know a lot about circadian rhythm. In other words, the rhythm of a single day. And we know very clearly that there needs to be a period of sleep every single day of roughly 7 hours, 7.5 hours, something like that. And if that's not there, then things go very dramatically wrong very, very quickly for human beings and probably for other creatures as well. So we need that regular daily reset. And in some senses, the idea of this day somewhere in the week, and it doesn't have to be Sunday or Saturday, or it can be any particular day, but the idea of having a day where you step back seems to me to be kind of the next layer of that. Within each day, we need to be resting. Across a week, we need to have a period of probably 1 day where we just step back from everything. Across the period of a year, it can be really valuable to step back even further, and perhaps engage in something even more. I don't know what the word is. More. I don't want to say fulfilling because any rest day can be fulfilling, but something that kind of really does positively recharge our tanks and help us to reset. And the other part of this, I think, too, is that human beings, we all love autopilot. We all love rhythm. We all love ritual, and we do that very naturally in our lives. In every single area of our lives, when you wash your clothes and put them away, you put your clothes back in the same drawers each time. When you put your kitchen implements away, you put them away in the same place. When you park your car in the driveway, you put it in the same place. In fact, I would be quite happy to make a bet with you right now. How much are you prepared to bet? Like, could we?
The better question is how much would you lose?
$10,000. Is that reasonable? $10,000.
That's probably a little excessive for me.
Okay, I'll do you a favour. I'll make it in euro. Let's say 10,000 euro. Is that better?
That's worse for me.
Oh, you're awake. Okay, let's make it $1,000. I'll bet you $1,000. I will bet you that every time you I know you ride your bike a lot, So every time you come home on your bike, you take your helmet off, which you wear, don't you?
Yes.
You take your helmet off and you put it in the same place every single time without fail. You don't come home and go, I might hang it on the wall today. I might put it in the cupboard today. You just automatically, do the same thing. So all of us automate our lives in that way across all dimensions of our lives, and we make sure that we minimize the kind of cognitive demands on ourselves in doing that. And in many ways, this is one of the functions, I think, of what we're talking about. Not only sleep each day, but this weekly kind of reset. What we're doing is really dramatically lowering the demands upon ourselves in order that some of those internal resources can start to replenish.
I actually really like that model you've introduced of almost like an onion layer. So, what's on a daily basis?
Daily, weekly. Yeah.
We go out a layer. We need some more rest, and then maybe a serious reset every, whatever it might be. I use this analogy. Stephen Covey, who wrote the book 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and he's got his 7 habits, but his last habit he calls sharpen the saw. And I actually think that, and I find this for me, this is my experience, is that having time out, and away from my computer, because we're just so dominated by these things nowadays, but actually intentionally going, okay, it's downtime, and giving yourself permission for that. It's recharging. It honestly is. And the number of times I actually, come away at the end of it and I've got some new ideas, or I've got some new clarity, and I've got new energy, to be honest, to get into it again. It is like sharpening the saw. And Stephen Covey uses that analogy of, if you just keep going with the same blade, it gets blunt. And eventually you get to the point where you're actually not very effective at cutting through at all anymore. And the best thing you can do is to pause, sharpen the blade, and then go again.
And then go back. Yeah.
I've had people say to me, if I wouldn't be able to get all that I need to get done if I took an intentional day out a week. And I go, and my response to that is, well, you know what? I'm a pretty busy dude as well. And I actually find that it makes me more productive, because I can be more sort of game on when I'm on. And I think that this really plays into it. And that's not to say anything for all of the other benefits that I think I get to experience as well. It's interesting. A couple of key researchers did a study on Jewish cohorts, and obviously the Jewish community are very big and quite strict, I would say, on how they practice this idea of a sort of Sabbath.
A Sabbath,
I'm assuming it was Anson was the author, but it was Anson and Anson. So I don't know whether they were brothers or spouses or whatever they were. But anyway, but what they found was quite interesting, and the name of the article was "Death Waits a While." And what they observed in this study, and it was a longitudinal study, they did it over many years, and they actually measured the mortality rates amongst the Jewish population. And what they found is there was this dip on their Sabbath. It's like this, and so and you go, oh well, that's in I suppose they're having a day off, and therefore that's that would explain that. What they actually found though is that amongst the the Jewish community, they have other sort of festival days as well, other Sabbaths if you like, that don't follow that sort of circumception cycle that might occur in the middle of the week, and they didn't see the same sort of dip on those particular days. So it's like whether it was just it gets so built into their habit of practice and the way they went about life. Actually, it was almost like this circumception rhythm was sort of knit into the fabric of who they are. So I find this interesting, but once again, to return to this whole idea of lifestyle medicine and stress management and rest, I think it'd be good to hear more about this. As sort of it's an ancient practice, but there's often real value in some of that stuff as well.
And it's been a modern practice too, because when I was a kid, stores were closed on Sunday.
They were?
Yes. And they were only open between 9 a.m. and noon on a Saturday.
Yes.
And that's the, I'm talking about the 1970s there that I recall, the 1970s in Australia. Then we started doing, stores used to do Thursday evenings. So you used to do like 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. Thursday evenings, there'd be extended hours till 9. Saturday mornings, 9 till 12, and that was it.
Yeah.
And then, then over time, there was this sort of gradual creep where, often some businesses may be open, many much later hours now, all day Saturday, all day Sunday, and so on. So I think what that means is that in order, there's the structure, the surrounding community structure that provides the cues for rest has diminished, and therefore individuals need to be much more conscious about choosing to do that. Interestingly, here in Spain, and even in Madrid, the capital city, there is still a very, very strong culture of exactly that. So many businesses, even businesses in the centre of the city, close between roughly 2 and 5 p.m. or roughly 2:30 and 5:30 for a siesta. Not all of them do. So a big department store, for example, will remain open all day. So something like the equivalent of Macy's in the US or Myer or David Jones in Australia will stay open all day. But small businesses will frequently close for the siesta. And it took me a while to get used to that because I'd think to myself, I'll go down to this store and I'll go down to the hardware store and buy a light bulb or something like that. They're closed. Okay, I've got to come back at 5 o'clock.
Yeah.
So there's still the siesta. That's kind of balanced in some way by then working later hours into the evening. So, often a business will reopen around 5 and then trade till 8 or maybe even 9 p.m. at night. And then people step away. And the joke in Spain, of course, is that you don't bother trying to get a dinner reservation before 10 p.m. because nothing's open.
Yeah,
so it's not quite true, but it's close to true. If you go out at 10 p.m., the restaurants are just starting to come alive with people, and that's when everyone kind of gathers with their family and their friends and so on. But the other really significant part is that Sunday, again, some businesses open on Sunday, but Sundays things largely stay closed, and even more so in the smaller cities. So I just took a trip up to the north of Spain to the region of Cantabria, which is right on the north coast of Spain, and it's an absolutely stunning, visually stunning region in Spain. But driving back, it's about a 5-hour drive, 4.5-5-hour drive to Cantabria. Driving back, I pulled off the motorway, the autopista, into a little village because I thought I'll be able to get a drink, some sparkling water, and maybe a snack. There was not a single place open. Everything was closed. And the streets were quiet. Everyone was at home. There were no cars on the streets. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. So there's still this really strong observance of that idea of today we do something different. We step back and don't engage with those things. This is a time for our family to be together. It's a time for us to rest, to enjoy the fruits of our labours, to recharge our batteries. And I've got to say, it's a lovely rhythm. It is a lovely rhythm.
And I think, and this is why I want to chat about this today, because that's not really the case in my part of the world, in Australia. We know, but I do remember, like you, a time when shops, for example, on Sundays weren't open at all. In fact, I remember the only thing that shops weren't legally allowed to open. The only things that were allowed to be bought and sold were books. And I still remember this guy who got himself into all sorts of strife because he owned a music store and he was selling books for like $8,000, and you got a free piano thrown in if you bought this book. So that was his way of working the system. But we've moved away from that now. For example, I'd say that for example, the weekend is probably one of the most busiest times at the shops. That's where people will often go to. But I think we've lost something. I think, and what you're describing, these small communities in Spain, there is a beauty to that. And I could only imagine if people were intentionally, the sort of, we live in an environment, in my part of the world at least, that doesn't tend to support that. But if we've got a bit more intentional about actually tapping out, actually taking time out, I think, this is my personal experience, it's an incredibly powerful tool for addressing the epidemic of stress that we have and burnout. And so, maybe I think what I wanted to prompt some thinking around is, what might that look like for you? And as I said, one thing I do, I call it a digital Sabbath. So I actually just try and disengage from the digital environment. I try and be in the real presence of other people on that particular day, get outside in nature, do some active things. But I think, and for me personally, I don't know how I'd do life without it, to be honest. That kind of
absolutely.
So, so it might be something that, others could think about, having that in being intentional about taking that time out to, put first things first, really.
Yeah, exactly right. And just reconnect with what really matters. Do you know it reminds me of a phrase that I heard. My mother used to use this phrase when I was a kid. And she was born in she's passed away now, but she was born in 1931, so she grew up during the Depression in Australia. You can imagine, and then during her adolescence, the Second World War was played out. Not that happened significantly in Australia, but there was still a kind of a milieu, I guess, of the concerns and worries about that, and the care with resources and one of the things Mum used to say, it was in relation to food. This, by the way, is long before we heard the phrase "eat plants, eat food, not too much, mainly plants." Mum used to say, "Eat to live, don't live to eat," which is kind of a prototypical version of Michael Pollan's idea. But the more significant thing that she used to say in our context is work to live, don't live to work.
Yeah, wow. That's...
And but we do work. We need to do work. It's important. It's an important part of who we are and what we do and how we see ourselves and our sense of efficacy and pride and achievement and accomplishment, all sorts of really great things. Work is very, very important. And we should work so that we can live. In other words, work enough and no more. Yeah.
Good approach. I think we need to put it into practice more.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you really want to supercharge it, on one of those days when you're resting, take yourself out in the evening, lie back on the grass, stare into the sky at the moon and the stars, and just wonder about how all this came to be.
Beautiful. Well said.
Lift is presented by Simon Matthews and Darren Morton. It's sponsored by the Lift Project and supported by Avondale University. Music provided by Pixabay. If you have a question or a topic you would like to hear more about, send us an email to podcast@theliftproject.global. The Lift Project. Lift your mood, lift your life.